Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the Disclosure Team YouTube channel. This will be the premiere of my interview with Ross Coulthart. We pre-recorded this interview because it was 10 a.m. here in the UK, 7 p.m. in Australia for Ross. I think most of America and a lot of other countries would have been asleep. So we thought that it wouldn't be worth going live. We wanted everyone to enjoy it, or as many people as possible to enjoy it at the same time. So we're premiering it here now for you guys. We had such a great chat. We could have gone on for at least twice the amount of time that we did, but Ross is obviously a very busy man with interviews and appearances and things all regarding the recent release of his book In Plain Sight. So guys, I hope you enjoy this interview, and yeah, thanks for watching. Peace. Welcome, Ross. Thank you so much for joining me. It really means a lot, and I can imagine that you've been very busy recently with the release of the book. So yeah, how's everything been?
Oh, it's been very gratifying. I mean, every journalist wants what he writes to be drawn on and followed, and I'm flattered and gratified by the fact that people are interested in what I have to say. I don't think I'm doing anything exceptional, Vinnie. All I'm doing is just following the evidence where it leads me. And I have to admit, as I've said many times, I'm quite shocked that other mainstream media aren't digging in these very verdant pastures. I find it a fascinating area for a good dig as an investigative journalist.
Yeah, and that's the thing. But a lot of journalists really don't like touching on this subject, and that's a historic fact. Why do you think that is?
Look, it's very real. I mean, I've been in newsrooms for newspapers, television, and radio, and everywhere you go, there's a taboo. There's a stigma associated with the subject of UFOs. And it's funny because when I'm in my very early weeks of writing this book and doing my research, and I would say to friends of mine, what are you writing your next book about, Ross? And I'd say, I'm writing a book about UFOs. And there would be this ironic smile, this kind of smirk or giggle that would come across people's faces. Somebody did it to me today. And the reality is, I don't think that's justified. I don't. You think about why. Why does that happen? Why is there that stigma, that taboo that's attached to the subject? I just don't think it's warranted. And what struck me, I'm a historian by nature. I love writing history books as much as I do doing investigative journalism. And I've written a lot of First World War history. And I like contrarian history. I like looking back at history and actually seeing what the documents record. And what fascinated me going through the files and looking in the archives of the CIA, the National Security Agency, the US Department of Defense, and our files here in Australia in the Department of Defence, the Joint Intelligence Organisation, was how there was a cognitive dissonance, if you like, between what the public was being told, ridicule, taboo, stigma, don't take this seriously, ignore it all, it's rubbish, just forget about it, it can all be prosaically explained. And when you looked behind the scenes at the declassified files in that era of the 70s and the 80s, the files that have been released under the 30-year rule that you and I operate under, it's quite obvious they've never stopped looking. The phenomenon has constantly been being monitored and observed. And I was most recently in the United States about 6 weeks ago, writing articles and finishing my book, and also doing a documentary for Channel 7 here in Australia. And in the course of engaging with US officials over there, it was patently obvious to me that they've never stopped looking at this phenomenon. It's always been a subject of great, intense interest, serious interest. And the taboo and stigma that, frankly, has been attached to the subject for the last 50 years, since the end of 60 years, actually, since the end of Project Blue Book, is completely unwarranted. I don't think it's justified. And the fact that you now have the US Department of Defense, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I mean, I was just reading the memo from the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, where she's essentially issued an edict to all military aircrew and government personnel to report UAPs. I mean, it's groundbreaking. It's a huge breakthrough. You know, this is history unfolding. And I'm just wondering why have we allowed ourselves to be so deceived? Because I think the lessons of history will show that in 20 or 30 years' time, when the full story is known of this era, I'm sure we will learn that there were cover-ups, there were lies, there was deception. And just what I'm wrestling with as a journalist is why? What's the reason for that? I'm still not sure I understand why.
No, that's yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, we just recently had the House of Lords here in the UK talking about the subject, saying that the Ministry of Defence aren't even looking into it anymore. And I mean, not very many people actually believe that, to be fair.
I mean, that's bullshit. I mean, you and I know it's bullshit. I mean, I've spoken to people in the British government who've told me that there are active investigations ongoing into UFOs. If you haven't already looked at it, I would recommend you look at the Penturk incident in Wales, which is astonishing. I mean, that sounds like a military retrieval of some kind. What the hell's going on? Why is the mainstream media not looking at that issue? I think it's an entirely legitimate area for, I mean, you think of some of the crazy shit that the media has done stories about, like, you know, my channel, my network where I was working at the time was equally as guilty. We were all fed lies by the US Defense Department that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Yeah.
And on the basis of that, the United Kingdom, your Tony Blair, our Prime Minister John Howard, we were led into war. Young men died, young women died, fighting a completely unnecessary war based on the complete misconception that there were weapons of mass destruction. So governments lie, governments do deceive. And in this case, you know, why is it such a shock for the media that there might actually be a vast conspiracy that's hiding incredible secrets? Because it's been done before, you know, and I think the media has really failed in this area. The mainstream media has really dropped the ball. And I've had conversations with journos from America and the UK in recent weeks, because my documentary apparently has been bootlegged all around the world. It's not meant to have been, but you know, people have been watching it and saying to me, "Oh, gee, Ross, you know, you're taking this seriously." And I go, "Well, yeah, I am. It's real." And they go, "Well, why do you say that?" And I say, "Because the US Pentagon says it's real. The Defense Department has acknowledged it cannot explain 143 out of 144 anomalous incidents involving sightings of objects tracked on radar, videotaped, seen by fighter pilots since 2004. It's a mystery. It's a genuine mystery, if you believe the US. I'm not so sure I do.
Well,
I think they know a lot more.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, it's been speculated for years that there's been cover-ups and that. We just haven't really got that final conclusive piece of data or acknowledgement. So you just mentioned your documentary, fantastic piece of work. I was very impressed. I've watched it a few times. I was really interested in one of the cases, that be the one in 91 at the Joint Base, the Naval Communications Station. Would you mind just giving us a brief outline of the story, just for people who might not be aware of it?
The Naval Communications Base Harold E. Holt is... Most Australians had no idea of this. I've actually had conversations with people in the last few weeks who said to me, "I didn't even know it existed." And what it is, it looks like something out of a science fiction movie. It's a huge, gigantic, 100-acre hexagonal array of...
This is meant to be it behind me.
Oh, is that it behind you?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Massive hexagonal array of masts that go up 300 meters into the air. And its purpose was conceived in the mid-1960s, when the Americans had difficulty communicating with their underwater nuclear submarines in the event of nuclear war. It was designed to send out VLF, very low frequency signals that could penetrate down to about 80 feet underwater, which would essentially issue a very short message instruction for submarines to come closer to the surface, deploy an acoustic buoy with a listening buoy where it could receive the communications to launch nuclear missiles. So this was serious stuff. This was a base that was plugged in to America's strategic nuclear deterrence. In the event of nuclear war, the Harold E. Holt base, in one of the most remote parts of Australia in Northwest Cape, would definitely be a strategic target, because the Russians, the Chinese, they knew, and they still know, that it's basically used to communicate with nuclear submarines. So it's definitely a target. Something took an interest in it. And it's not just the 1991 incident. I can't tell this story without saying that in the Australian files of the Defence Department, there's an incident that took place in October 1973 at the very height of the Arab-Israeli war. And the Russians were getting very, very worried that their ally, Syria, might be overrun by the Israelis, because the Israelis had completely kicked the butts of the allied Arab nations that had taken them on. And they were literally on the outskirts of Damascus, shelling Damascus. And the Russians were really worried. They were telling Henry Kissinger, the US Secretary of State, that they were thinking of deploying troops into the Middle East. Wow. And Henry Kissinger had warned them, that would be a provocation, we could risk nuclear war if that happens, because we would go to the defense of our ally Israel. Yeah. And so the world was in an incredibly dangerous situation in October 1973. And the files that I've got from the Defence Department of Australia show that the deputy commander of that base, an American called Meyer or Moyer, we're not sure which it is, he reported seeing within hours of Kissinger lifting the defence readiness level from DEFCON 4 to DEFCON 3. He reported seeing a spherical black object hovering over or near the base. And so did an Australian fireman, William Lynn, who drew a picture of this object, which essentially looks like a chubby flying saucer. Wow. And when I went through the archives, I discovered there were numerous military sightings of anomalous flying saucer, disc-shaped, triangular-shaped objects over and around this base going back many, many decades. And so the 1991 incident came at a really interesting time in this base's history, because the base was in the process of being returned to Australian control. The Labor government had come in, and the Prime Minister Hawke had basically asked the Americans if this could be restored to Australian control for political reasons, because it was, when you think about it, pretty crazy that we were giving the Americans a secret base on Australian soil that we knew was a nuclear target, a bit like your Greenham Common and numerous other bases in the UK.
Absolutely.
And so the Americans were slowly pulling out, and a lot of the local girls were a bit sweet on some of those American boys. And so there were parties at the base. And Annie Farinaccio was a young Australian girl who was interested in partying at the base that night. And she came out from a good night with some of the people in the base at about 2:30 a.m. and it was pitch black. And she realised she'd missed the last cab, the last taxi that could take her the 5 kilometres down the road to Exmouth, which is the village the Australians share with the Americans who operated at the base. Right. And then these two security guards, these two Australian policemen they'd now be federal police. Back in those days, they were known as Australian Protective Security Officials. And they came out and said, look, we'll give you a ride back in our 4-wheel drive. And they weren't meant to. But, they took pity on this young girl and thought nobody would notice. Anyway, they did their quick checks to make sure the base was secure, and then she hopped in the front seat with them, and they're driving along this lonely, dark coast road on the road back to Exmouth. It's pitch black. And then all of a sudden, like something out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the road is lit up in front of them. And the two police officers yell, "It's back!" And they've seen this, it turns out, the night before. And they'd actually brought a camera, a 35mm film camera with a lens, and they started taking photographs through the windscreen. And the way Annie tells me, it's quite comical. She doesn't know what they're seeing, and she can't see because it's high up above the car. Yeah. And so they pull her head forward, and she looks up, and she sees this giant black triangle hovering over the top of the vehicle. And she's completely freaked, because you can see it's a craft of some kind. It's got lights running down its spine. It's got lights in each corner. And as she watches, it doesn't move. It just flits in an instant. It goes to 1,000 feet is her estimate. Wow. And then it just drops instantaneously to the side of the vehicle to window level, and it's like it's tracking them along as they're driving along at 100 kilometers an hour. And it's literally bobbing up and down with the shrubs, the bush, as they're driving along. And then as they watch, it instantaneously jumps again and goes to 1,000 feet and then comes down on the other side of the car. And by this stage, she is completely freaked, and she's pleading with them to drop her off on the township edge, and she can just go home as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But they want to follow it. They want to photograph it and follow it into the bush and take photographs, because they can see it's landing. Whatever it is, it's landing in the bush, in the scrub.
Wow.
So she pleads with them, and so they scream 2 kilometers down the road to Exmouth, drop her off, and she runs. The way she describes it, she was so freaked. She runs home, runs into her bedroom, locks all the doors, and just for 2 days forgets about it, which is interesting in itself.
It is. Yeah, that is strange.
Yeah, she forgets about it. And then 2 days later, these 2 American military policemen, and I've spoken to people who can testify to this happening, they walk into her workplace and they demand that she comes with them. And she thinks her friends at the base with whom she was having a good time have got into trouble for carousing on the base late at night. And so she doesn't want them to get into trouble. So she goes with them. You know, she's a nice young woman. She wants to help her friends. But as she's driven there, she realizes this isn't about them being on the base at night. It's about that object that she'd seen, because she's taken into this very secure part of the base, which is well known as the top secret part of the base. And there's no stopping at the gate. There's no checking of her data or her license or anything like that. They're just waved straight through. And then she's taken into this room, and the first thing she sees are the 2 policemen sitting dejectedly on chairs in the middle of a room. And they're really hangdog. They look like they've been there for hours, and they had been. And they'd been questioned about the circumstances in which they'd clearly, improperly, illegally given this young woman a ride home. And she'd clearly seen something she wasn't meant to see. Because in the room, Annie knows all the Americans in Exmouth who go to the base. She knows them all intimately. The only person she can recognize is the base commander, who's sitting up the back, not really taking part in proceedings. But all around her, there are these very senior brass, American senior brass. There are people dressed in civilian suits, uniform. And it's clear people have come in specially for this debriefing. And she's questioned for hours about what she saw. And she says, I saw some kind of craft, some kind of UFO, flying saucer, whatever you want to call it. And they begin to tell her that she didn't see a craft. She didn't see a UFO or a flying saucer. She just saw a weather balloon. And she thinks that's funny, because she actually laughs at them, because her dad used to launch the weather balloons in this part of Western Australia. Her family are very respected family. They've, for a long time, had a good relationship with the Bureau of Meteorology. And she's a feisty Australian girl of Italian descent. She stands up for herself and gives a lip back and says, I'm not saying it was a bloody weather balloon. And, you can't make me change my mind about what I say. And after a while, they're somewhat frustrated, and they just accept that they can't stop her from thinking what she thinks. But she's basically it's strongly clear to her that she's not meant to talk about what she saw, which is interesting to me, because it does suggest that the Americans knew what this was, or at least were aware of it to the extent of wanting to keep it secret. So were they working on some new technology? And the timing's interesting, because if you think about this, I mean, I'm joining some dots here, but if you think that maybe, just maybe, there's something to the possibility that the US was testing anti-gravitic technology or new propulsion technology in Area 51 Nevada test range in the late 80s. Yeah. And then it was blown because of people like Bob Lazar. Just hypothetically, if Lazar is telling the truth and if George Knapp's on the money, which I suspect he is, if you were the Americans, you'd be worried about people like Jim Goodall sitting at the end of your runway with a very big lens, taking photographs of every craft taking off, and people sitting up in the hills with, night vision cameras and taking vision that they shouldn't. Yeah. And so if you were the US, you'd be looking for a new location to go and test technology. And I don't think it's outside the realm of probability that that's what happened here, that maybe the US has been testing technology, and maybe whoever it was that was controlling that craft, if they were on board, maybe they thought that it was an American Jeep and that they were buzzing Americans who'd just come out of the base and they were just having some fun. And I can imagine maybe a few butts were kicked along the way because the two policemen were basically scared within an inch of their lives. They were basically worried for their lives. They were worried they were going to get killed. Anyway, there's a sequel to this, because Annie, as I told you, is a very strong-minded woman. She's had experiences before where she'd seen weird things. Most people in Exmouth have. There's a long history of locals seeing weird stuff in and around the Northwest Cape area. And indeed, one person I spoke to actually told me that he was at an outdoor cinema in Exmouth the very night that Annie saw this object, and he and his mates saw objects that he believes were in orbit, flitting across the sky, dramatically moving across the sky at impossible speeds. And it was a talking point for them that they didn't really watch the movie. They sat up and just looked at these objects moving across the sky that night. I've spoken to an SAS soldier, a very, very senior warrant officer who of great repute, his own commanding officer. In the paperwork that I've seen, I found the Defence Department files that record his sighting. He and another warrant officer saw a spherical, intelligently controlled object that hovered over the RAF Learmonth base, where the SAS was doing an exercise, which is only a short distance drive from this secret American-Australian base.
Right.
But anyway, Annie, prefacing all that with the fact that Annie and many, many locals have clearly seen anomalous objects for many, many years. I'll go on to tell you what happened next, because she contacted her cousin, who's a lovely fella, and he drove down from the Kimberley, which is a huge drive, about a 10-hour drive, but he was really interested to get to the bottom of this. And so he and Annie went around to the house that they knew was lived in by one of these two federal police officers that had basically seen this anomalous object with her that night.
Right.
And they knocked on the door, and he freaked when she was standing there and basically said, come in, did anybody see you? And he was really, really panicked. And the way it's been told to me, the federal police officer, admitted that they had gone back after they dropped Annie off, that they'd secured photographs, of incredibly clear photographs of this object, whatever it was, landed or hovering in the shrubs, the bush adjacent to the side of the road on the Exmouth Road near the Northwest Cape base. And they got fantastic photographs. But unfortunately, as you would probably know, every American military base has cheap everything. It's a great place to get photographs developed, to buy cheap clothes, cheap booze, cheap Coca-Cola, whatever you want. And so they went and got the film that they'd shot developed at a photographic machine on the base the following week. And they were showing these photographs to people on the base. And the way he told them, he was arrested. And he and his colleague were thrown in the brig and then interrogated for several days about what they'd done. They'd let this Australian girl, in complete breach of protocol, into their car, and somebody or something had buzzed the four-wheel drive, and it was clearly something that Annie, a local, wasn't meant to have seen. Yeah. Now, she and other locals have told me that they think that the US is experimenting with technology up there, but they also don't think this explains everything that they've seen. They do think that there is some kind of incredibly advanced technology operating up there that they're not entirely sure is American. And the reason they say this is because I went up there for Australia's 60 Minutes, and I'd sort of let it be known that I was interested in the UAP phenomenon because I'd heard about the October 1973 incident from Defence Archives. And a few of the locals were a bit suspicious of me on that trip. But then when I went back, they kind of knew me by that stage because I'd been sitting around in the pub and trying to engage people in conversation somewhat forlornly. And They were a bit worried I was going to hit them with a TV camera because my crew were there as well. And so I went back without a camera and just sat in the pub and tried to talk to people. And one night, this guy in a big yellow fluorescent vest, a workman clearly, walked up to me in a pub and he said, "Are you that journo that's been investigating UFOs?" And I went, "Yep." And I was thinking, "Oh, Christ, he's going to abuse me or something." But instead, he went, "Good, because we've all seen them."
Wow.
And then he turned and he pointed to these guys on another table who were sort of looking at me like this. And they all sort of said, "Come over, come over." And then I just sat there with these guys and bought them beers. And they told me how, as road workers, they were working on roads. And because it's so bloody hot up there, you often work on the roads in the early evening or the early morning.
Right.
They would see anomalous objects all the time. And then they introduced me to a local fisherman, a commercial fisherman, who described to me how they had the lights off on the fishing boat. He was having a durry, so he was having a cigarette late at night and just sitting on the side of the boat, beautiful, clear, crystal clear night. And he was looking at the stars and the satellites. And he noticed one satellite that was moving incredibly fast. And then he realized it wasn't a satellite because it changed course.
Wow.
And then it literally, in the space of a few seconds, he believes came from orbit. And he watched as it hit the water, probably no further than a kilometer from him.
Wow.
And what he says is really interesting. He says it didn't cause the kind of splash that you would imagine an object like that would cause. It's almost as if the water displaced for whatever the object was. And then he'd called his mates and they all came running out and they watched on the side of the boat as this light from within the object moved underwater at incredible speed and then took off to a distance where they couldn't see it anymore.
Wow.
And I've spoken to soldiers, civilians who've seen orbs, gigantic black triangles, very similar to the one that Annie described. I've even spoken to a former Royal Australian Air Force senior officer who lives in that part of Western Australia or not too far from that part of Western Australia. And he told me he'd also seen the big black triangle that Annie described. Something is going on in that part of Australia. And it's interesting because I still don't think we've got to the bottom of exactly what's been going on there. But my investigations led me on to the fact that the second most interesting base in Australia is the Pine Gap joint facility that we operate with the Americans in Central Australia near Uluru, near Ayers Rock.
Yeah, that's going to be one of my questions for you today. Was going to be just basically what do we know about Pine Gap, because it's been spoken about for quite some time, for decades. In fact, I've just heard it coming up here and there, but no one ever says anything about it or what. Look,
there's a lot of nonsense in ufology. People talk about sort of, multiple underground chambers and secret alien experiments. I've got no evidence to suggest that's going on. But I mean, what it's really doing in reality is still quite mind-blowing. It's again, it's probably the most important American base outside of the continental USA anywhere in the world. Wow. And what it does is it provides early warning of missile launches by America's enemies and rivals. And so if you see a rocket flare over North Korea or China or Russia, the DSP, the Defense Support Program satellites that are hovering in geostationary orbit over the planet, including over Australia, they pick up those flares. And that's just part of the technology that's operating there. There's now a space telescope that the US has recently installed at Exmouth near the Harold Holt base. And there's the Jindalee Over-the-Horizon radar network, which was originally conceived as a backscatter radar just for monitoring the sort of South Pacific and Indonesia and Southeast Asia. And sure. It's actually, it's turned out to be a much more effective monitor of the ionosphere, the lower Earth orbit. And my sources tell me it's a very good detection system for objects coming in and out of orbit. So if the North Koreans, for example, or the Chinese are experimenting with intercontinental ballistic or short-range missiles, then you can pick those up. And so Pine Gap's primary role is essentially as an early warning for, nuclear war, if you like, or for the bad guys doing bad stuff with short range or intermediate weapons. It played a key role, for example, in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Its detection technology is exceptional, and frankly, it serves a very useful and important purpose.
Indeed,
in protecting defence, and we shouldn't think of it as a bad thing. It's an important part of the UKUSA, the UK-USA Five Eyes alliance, which essentially is an intelligence alliance that has essentially provided security now for the planet for the last 76 years and assured, I think, American military dominance, which is why this phenomenon is so important, because I think in all the analyses, people fail to realize that every American military doctrine since World War II has been based around the notion of force dominance, that the Americans will always enjoy aerospace technological dominance over their rivals. And they have, largely. There's no way Russia could have made an SR-71 or a U-2. The bureaucracy would have made it impossible. And, people like Ben Rich, incredible visionary aerospace geniuses who were encouraged with unlimited amounts of cash to create fantastic aerospace craft. They're heroes, really, because they've essentially protected the West from global communism. And, that needs to be acknowledged. I preface everything I say here with the fact that I don't think Pine Gap is a bad thing as a way of protecting us against our potential adversaries. But I'm also told by sources both in our military and also particularly in the US military and intelligence services that Pine Gap in particular, but also Northwest Cape and the Space Telescope, they are increasingly detecting what are colloquially known as fast walkers. Anomalous objects.
So I was just going to say, that's something we heard in the Podesta emails, I believe, as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the people that I interviewed in the book is a guy who basically told me that he saw some of the data flow from the DSP satellites that feed through Pine Gap and other American facilities. And he saw the downlink in Long Beach, California, an aerospace company, which I suspect was either TRW or Lockheed Martin. And what he's told me he saw was an object that clearly came from deep space at speed, clearly intelligently controlled because it changed course, and then it altered velocity and went into the Earth's atmosphere. And I've spoken since as a result of that, and I've shown it. I used it as a way of encouraging people to talk to me about it, because as a journalist, what you do is you approach somebody and you say, look, can you talk to me about what you've seen on the radar arrays or the data feeds coming in at Pine Gap? And they go, no way, I'm never going to talk to you about that. And so what I've done is I've basically gone to those incredible Podesta emails and I've said, well, look, this is what one guy said he saw in the 1980s in Long Beach in California. What you're talking to me about is pretty well known now. It's discussed. And I was friendly with a guy before he passed away called Jeff Richardson, who did a lot of the work to analyze what places like Pine Gap did. And in my own role as an investigative journalist, I did a lot of work on the UKUSA, the Five Eyes Alliance's communications surveillance, essentially the tapping into microwave links by satellite, or the tapping by induction of underwater cables, or essentially just the interception of communications, fiber optic communications that the US is now doing, or satellite communications on a global scale.
Yeah.
And that echelon communications surveillance opened my eyes to the incredible extent to which you in the UK, the GCHQ, Australia, the ASD, formerly the Defence Signals Directorate, the Australian Signals Directorate, the American National Security Agency, Canadian CSE, Communications Security Establishment, and the Kiwis, we all collaborate essentially to bug communications and spy as a way of ensuring the dominance, if you like, of the Five Eyes Alliance. So no wonder the Russians and the Chinese get the shits with us. But The reality is that we're also collaborating, I'm told, increasingly. And Tim McMillan of The Debrief has done quite a lot of work on this, but I've confirmed what Tim's said, which is that there is increasingly collaboration in terms of data collection about anomalous phenomena. And now that we've got this incredible memo from Kathleen Hicks of the US Defense Department, essentially ordering American aircrew, American defense personnel to report UAPs, I think it's going to become more overt. I had a guy contact me yesterday who saw an incident in a state in Northern America, which he saw on his radar scope, which is just absolutely mind-blowing, a gigantic UAP. And the reason he was approaching me was because he was aware of the openness that's being manifested by decisions like this by the Department of Defense. And he's decided to speak publicly, and he wanted to engage with me and talk to me about it. So I'm really excited to be hearing from people like that.
Yeah, they are. They've started coming out all sorts of places. I've been contacted by people. I know friends of mine have been as well. And it's just miraculous to see the tides changing finally for these people that have kept quiet and maybe even struggled behind the scenes sometimes, I believe, having this burden on their shoulders, what they've seen, and they're not able to talk about it and things like that.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of them, the way it's been explained to me, a lot of them are still convinced that it's secret American technology. And they didn't want, they're patriots. They don't want to compromise something that they think is giving America a strategic advantage. But now that you've got Kathleen Hicks, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, issuing a memorandum like that, and now that you've got eminent, reputable people like Christopher Mellon, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Lou Elizondo, you've got James Woolsey, a former CIA director. I've forgotten the other CIA director's name, but you've got the former DNI, John Ratcliffe. You've got President Obama. I mean, you've got people at a very senior level in the military and in defense and intelligence hierarchy in the United States now doing a complete backflip. We're in a completely new paradigm where officials who previously wouldn't give this subject the time of day are now acknowledging not only that it's real, but that it does deserve to be investigated. It is, contrary to what we were told in the wake of Project Blue Book, it is a flight safety issue. These pilots have reported 11 near misses, according to the UAP report that was filed in the Congress. We are in a completely new paradigm now where, for its own reasons, the Pentagon is now saying, this is real. Hey, guys, gosh, we've just discovered this phenomenon. This is the implausible thing to me about this, that they've set this date arbitrarily from 2004. And we're meant to believe that they've just suddenly discovered that there's something going on that they didn't know about. I call BS on that. But I do think it's a positive thing, at least, that the US in particular, but also my government, I'm having conversations with people here in the hope that I can get people to be more open about some incidents that I know of that have taken place in Australia that have not yet been publicly reported. And there's genuine surprise that their American ally is talking about it. In fact, I approached an Australian official a week ago about something that he was shocked to hear from me, that I'd been told about it by a particular official who'd suggested I go and talk to him about it. And he said, "You got to speak to blah." And I went, yeah. And they're engaging with people like me about this phenomenon. They want it talked about. And this is what I'm excited about. Is I suspect that there is a bit of an attempt to control the narrative going on inside the Pentagon. But I'm finding, as a so-called mainstream investigative journalist, there is a willingness and an openness, a preparedness to engage that I've never seen before. And it's a very positive thing. It's only to be applauded.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. One thing I did want to touch upon you with is the Admiral Wilson documents, the Wilson Davis notes. I mean, so many people talk about them. They still speculate if they're completely genuine or not. What are your thoughts on the notes?
Okay, my perception is molded by the fact that I have a source who prefers to remain anonymous, who is the keeper of the Edgar Mitchell archive.
Oh,
And that source is the person who provided the Eric Davis memo, otherwise known as the Admiral Wilson memo,
yeah.
to James Rigney, my Australian colleague, who then passed it on to Grant Cameron, and it eventually found its way, I think, onto Reddit and became public a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And that source, for their own reasons, which are quite valid, wants to stay anonymous. But they gave me access to Edgar Mitchell's private UAP UFO archives. And what's fascinating is they show that there was a clear pattern of consistent exchange of information between Dr. Hal Puthoff of the National Institute of Discovery Science, that for whom this memo was written, Dr. Eric Davis, who wrote the celebrated Admiral Wilson memo, wrote this memo for NIDS as a report to Hal Puthoff on his investigations into claims that Admiral Wilson and other senior officials in the Defence Intelligence Agency were being frustrated, allegedly, in their efforts to try and find out about a secret crash retrieval program that the Pentagon was covering up. And, just to give your audience a quick summary of the implications of the memo, if it's true, the United States is concealing the fact that a flying saucer or a craft of some kind, or perhaps multiple craft, are being concealed by a company in private aerospace in what is obviously a deep black program hidden behind multiple special access programs that are probably waived and unacknowledged. And Admiral Wilson, allegedly, according to the memo, described his attempts to Eric Davis to find out about this secret program, because initially, when he was told about it by Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project, he didn't believe it. And then Greer gave him some code names, which came from a separate National Reconnaissance Organization document, which he validated and found were real code names. And then when he searched behind those code names, according to the Admiral Wilson memo, the Eric Davis notes, he discovered that there was indeed a secret program inside the Pentagon, jealously guarded by a very tight, small number of people inside the military, where a secret back engineering program attempting to re-engineer recovered alien spacecraft was being run by a private aerospace company under the control and edict of the Department of Defense. I mean, it's just massive if true. Now, I can't verify the veracity of the claims that Eric Davis makes based on what he says Admiral Tom Wilson told him. Yeah. The difficulty I have as a journalist is that I've corresponded with Admiral Tom Wilson, and we've exchanged communications where he's made it abundantly clear to me that he says it's complete nonsense, that it never happened. He never met Dr. Eric Davis, never had a meeting of this kind, never made statements such as this to Dr. Eric Davis or anyone, and that he has not made any secret investigations inside the Pentagon into an alleged program that's hiding recovered alien technology. So in the face of that denial, I think there's quite a bit of overwhelming evidence to support that somebody like Admiral Tom Wilson actually says in the memo, if it's true, that he would lie about it if he was questioned. And so this is a difficulty with the plausibly deniable special access programs, where if you're sworn into these programs and you take an oath of security and secrecy, you have to lie about them if you're confronted about them. So I don't for a moment doubt that Admiral Tom Wilson is an extremely highly respected and honourable military officer. I cannot attest as to the veracity of the assertions made in the Admiral Wilson memo, because Tom Wilson denies them flatly, directly to me. But I do believe Eric Davis had a conversation with a person that he believes was the former director of the Defence Intelligence Agency, Admiral Tom Wilson, and he believes that he was told what he was told by Admiral Tom Wilson. So go figure.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is Hal Puthoff has confirmed, incidentally, the provenance of the memo by asserting that Dr. Eric Davis did meet with Admiral Tom Wilson. And I go into a lot of detail. I do a very methodical investigation because I think it warrants it in the book, explaining why I don't think the Admiral Wilson memo can be dismissed out of hand. And my investigations took me on to other unconnected officials who confirmed to me on the record, notably Nat Kobitz, the former Director of Science and Technology Development for the US Navy. He confirmed to me on the record, whether I should believe it or not, that he was he was briefed and given the security oaths, read into a crash retrieval program involving the retrieval and attempts to back engineer multiple craft.
Wow.
So again, as a journalist, I don't immediately leap to the conclusion that this is all true, because it could be an elaborate disinformation program by the US government designed to try and impress the Russians or the Chinese, don't screw with us because we've got technology you guys can only dream about. But I am genuinely of the view, because of the assertions that have been made by Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, Dr. Eric Davis, and privately to me, numerous other officials, including people who purport to have worked inside the program. I do believe that the US has recovered what Lou Elizondo has on occasion referred to as craft, vehicle, or just exotic technology.
Yeah.
Somebody knows something about recovered technology that they believe is non-terrestrial, non-human, intelligently crafted technology from somewhere else.
Wow.
And I know that's a big call, and I know a lot of my journo friends in mainstream media are going to go, "Oh, Ross has gone completely nuts." But when you have officials on the record making these assertions, there's that amazing interview that Lou Elizondo had with Tucker Carlson, where Tucker actually asks him, has the US recovered alien technology or something like that?
Yeah.
And Lou's wrestling with it. He talks initially about his national security oath and how he can't talk about it. So Tucker just gives him okay, we'll start winding up. He goes, okay. But then Lou cuts over him and goes, but yes, he actually comes back and actually says yes. He answers yes to the question. That's a momentous moment for me. You've got the former director, or, okay, let's not quibble. Was he the director? But he was certainly a senior leader inside the Defense Department's investigations into UFOs.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, do not screw around with Lou Elizondo. I have spoken to people who have attested to me just how highly cleared Lou Elizondo was and is. The guy was so plugged in. People will be amazed if and when this ever comes out in a few years' time.
I've got a good rapport with Lou, so I'm on the right side of that man.
Yeah.
So,
I do not buy into the BS where people in ufology play these silly sniping games where they're playing silly games about whether or not the military's right when it comes back with these pathetic denials about whether or not he headed a program. I just don't care. The bottom line is he was in a senior role, and he was in a position to know some pretty staggering stuff. And I know this because people I know here in Australia who've worked with him in special forces have vouched for him as a man of impeccable reputation. And we're very, very lucky to have somebody like him who's pushing publicly, and I think insanely taking risks. It's incredibly good that he's doing this, but pushing publicly for transparency and disclosure and openness. It only begs the question, what does he know that we don't know that's making him think it needs to be exposed?
Well, I mean, you asked him a question yourself, didn't you? If there was imagery that would blow people's socks off, I think were your words, and he replied with a smirk, absolutely. And I was going to ask you that, did he allude off camera to anything to you? Because, recently he's spoken about this 23-minute video, and other things have been hinted. So
anything I discussed with Lou off camera is on background only, and I can't abuse the privilege of having a confidential conversation with a source.
Understood.
He's incredibly open, and but at the same time, he honors his security oath. He's not someone who's going to be anything other than an American patriot. He's motivated, I think, by the very best of motives, as is Chris Mellon.
Yeah.
And as are the other people, because what happened when I spoke to Nat Kovitz from the US Navy, ex-US Navy, I mean, he was the chief geek, the chief research guy for the US Navy. If anyone's briefed into this, he would be. And the thing that puzzled me with Nat was he came back to me, and I said to him, do you think the US has mastered anti-gravity? Because there's these wacky Salvatore Pay patents, these US Navy patents.
That's on my notes to ask you about.
Yeah. And so I asked Nat, I said, look, do you know from any of your sources, is it possible that the US has cracked anti-gravitic propulsion? And he went away, and he came back to me a week or so later, and he said, "No, Ross, I've made a few inquiries," and he says, "I don't think we have. I really don't think we have." But he said it's clear even from the briefing that he'd had that it's being worked on in the black. There are definitely ongoing programs involving anti-gravity. And by the way, I'll tell you something here interesting, Vinnie, that I've not mentioned yet that I think is really important. I was really interested in Ning Li, the female Chinese scientist who bobbed up briefly a few years ago in Huntsville, Alabama, talking about imminent breakthroughs in anti-gravity, talking about how, the US was poised to, make astonishing announcements about this phenomena. Have you noticed, has anyone out there noticed that Ning Li now appears to be in China?
Yeah, I saw that. There was a thread on Twitter even yesterday about her that suddenly cropped up out of nowhere, and it was bizarre. Yeah. So,
and what the hell's going on? And I'm told, this is what I was told independently of the Ning Li stuff. I'm told that China is mounting an incredibly aggressive campaign to get to the bottom of what the US knows, and that this might actually be hindering the willingness of the Congress to be more open, that for strategic national security reasons that, frankly, I have to be honest with you, make some sense.
Yeah.
Why the hell should we know this? I've been in situations as a journalist when on occasion I've known, for example, that Australian troops are about to be deployed into a war zone.
Right.
And it was not good that I knew that, because if I'd run that, they might have been compromised.
Of course.
And so we made the decision as a TV network not to run that story. And journalists do, we do make, even though we're often accused of being reckless with national security information, we do make strategic decisions every now and then about what should and shouldn't be published. Which, by the way, if I'm jumping around, is why I have a real bee in my bonnet about Julian Assange, because he didn't do that.
No.
And I'm shocked about the circumstances in which the Guardian published the encryption code that allowed the full WikiLeaks leak to be decrypted.
Absolutely.
In circumstances that, frankly, were just appalling, just so reckless. I don't want to sound like I'm being an apologist for the military or the defense forces, but they exist for very good reasons, and I'm privy to things that I shouldn't be privy to about what's going on in the world at the moment, about, a strategically dangerous situation, particularly with China. Yeah. And we have national security defense forces for very good reasons. We operate the Five Eyes Alliance for very, very good reasons. Nobody should question why those exist. They've saved the Western world. They've kept people safe in their homes at night. And I guess my worry is that at the very time that the world of UFO, UAP transparency is pushing for openness, we are on the edge of confrontation with China in a way that we haven't been for 20, 30 years, if ever. And it's a real worry. And I can see how strategic decision makers that might have been leading a push for transparency and a greater degree of openness and disclosure say before the 2016 election, perhaps, with Hillary Clinton possibly becoming president. I can see how there might have been a perception that it would have been a good idea to come clean about what they knew back then, but I can see also how possibly the priorities have changed. Maybe that's what's dictating the slightly slower pace we're now seeing in Washington, because I'm really worried that we're losing the impetus for congressional hearings.
Really?
I know Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon are still pushing, and they're still urging UFO Twitter and social media to push, and people should.
Yeah.
Because I think they're thinking they can get away with it. I think they're thinking they can snow the public for another 50 years and just quietly get on with what they've been doing in the black for, probably 76 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, Ross, we're almost up at time. I could talk. I mean, my list of questions goes on and on. Maybe we'll redo this in a few months' time or something. But
I'd be very happy to. Your show's a great show. I've listened to it quite a few times, actually, without even realizing it was you.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I would be very happy to take part on a future occasion.
That's great. But I'm just going to finish with one question, and it's quite a light one. In all of your research and investigations covering UAP, do you have a standout favorite case, let's say? Anything that really you keep going back to?
Look, I'll tell you, this, I think I want to flag this as being incredibly important. The thing I've flagged a lot in recent interviews is the WikiLeaks leaks, which basically show that there were these secret discussions taking place between generals and people in aerospace and talking about the possibility of disclosure in a Hillary Clinton presidency. But I've talked about that. But I want to really emphasize the significance of what Jay of the Mind Sublime blog discovered on Chris Mellon's website, the 9th slide, the slide 9. Are you aware of this?
I am very aware of it indeed, yes.
This is a briefing slide that was provided to the Undersecretary for Defense in the United States, or at least it was prepared for a briefing for the Undersecretary of Defense by ATIP, by the Pentagon-funded, the DIA-funded Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And it really pays to read it out because it says it all. It's like something out of Star Trek. DOD, Defense Department Threat Scenario. The science exists for an enemy of the United States to manipulate both physical and cognitive environments in order to penetrate US facilities, influence decision makers, and compromise national security. That sounds like something out of the Manchurian Candidate. Influence decision makers.
Yeah.
Psychotronic weapons. That's weapons that can manipulate human perception, human consciousness.
Yeah.
Penetration of solid surfaces. Well, some of my witnesses have described to me seeing orbs penetrating Pine Gap.
I've heard that story. Yeah.
Instantaneous sensor disassembly. I mean, it really pays. I won't read the whole thing out, but people should go to a great bit of work by Jay from the Mind Sublime blog. I wish I'd dug this up. And its significance, I think, has been overlooked.
Yeah.
And I think people have hoped that its significance would be overlooked because this is what ATIP was telling the Department of Defense. This is what they were briefing them on in secret. And God knows why the New York Times or the Washington Post or any of the mainstream media in the US haven't leapt onto this, because what it's suggesting is what Jacques Vallée said 30 years ago, that ultimately this phenomenon goes back to consciousness and perception. That whatever it is, it can screw with our mind.
Absolutely.
That's the thing I find interesting about this, that Jacques Vallée said a long, long time ago to those who were prepared to listen, that it was too simplistic. Have I lost you?
No.
Oh, good. Your vision's just gone. So Jacques, you're just back now. Yeah. Jacques Vallée said quite a few years ago that it was too simplistic to consider that the phenomenon was just little green men and alien spacecraft coming to visit planet Earth. The extraterrestrial hypothesis does not fit the evidence. And to me, slide 9 is the evidence to support what Jacques Vallée said all those years ago.
Yeah, I saw an interview recently between James Ian Doley of Engaging the Phenomenon and Lou Elizondo, and he really focused on slide 9. And Lou...
Oh, I haven't seen that. No, I'll pull it out. I like James's work. What did Lou say?
Not a lot, but you could see it
He would
all on his
have
face.
run for cover, I'm sure. There's no way he's going to break a security oath. But no, look, I've spoken to one of the most weird conversations I had was with a guy who was incredibly senior at one stage in the FBI, and he told me he had weird experiences. And, he'd woken up in his bedroom and an entity is at the end of his bed. And I thought, this guy's bonkers. And then I checked out who he was. And, this is a really senior person who's worked at a very high level in Washington, D.C. And people I spoke to, both in our police force here in Australia, they knew him. They respected him enormously.
Wow.
And he described some of that very phenomena that's in slide 9. A phenomena that is capable of manipulating psychotronically, influencing your mind, altering your perception. This, I think, is where it's all going next. I know it's fuzzy, it's kind of nebulous, but if this is what the Defense Department is being told by the people it paid to do an exhaustive inquiry into the phenomenon, this is where we're going next.
That's exciting, I think, personally. I mean, we've tried for decades for the nuts and bolts route, and it just hasn't really led us anywhere, or so we're led to believe. So, no, I agree. And my research has started moving into that area of that. Well, it's time to look elsewhere. And I agree, the consciousness side of things is probably one of the most interesting and most likely directions. So I agree. But listen, Ross, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure speaking with you today. And I have read the book, and I would recommend it to anybody out there watching now. Please pick up a copy of In Plain Sight. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's on sale in the UK, I think, from August the 15th, the print copy. And it's a little bit delayed in the US. Apparently, it's not coming out in the US until October. But it will get there eventually, I'm told.
It will, but it is available on Kindle, and I think Audible have got the audiobook already. And I've heard a lot of praise about the fact that you actually narrate it yourself, Ross, which I think...
I was really worried my Aussie imitations of American accents were going to get me made a very unpopular person. I wouldn't be allowed back into the States next time I go. But
no, I've heard nothing but good things.
A lot of people have told me they particularly loved my imitation of Tom DeLonge. I just hope Tom forgives me, that's all.
Sure he will. Sure he's quite forgiving. But thank you so much, Ross, again. And we will keep our eyes on all the work that you've been doing, and you're going to be doing coming up in the future. And like I said, I'd love to speak to you again, in a few months' time.
Anytime, Vinnie. Good to talk to you and good to talk to your listeners.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for watching. The continued support. It's overwhelming, and I really appreciate it. So until next time, see you then. Bye-bye.